If your team keeps saying it'll be fun later, there's a real reason your game isn't fun. And it's not effort, it's prioritization. You can ship a mountain of features and still create nothing when the game hits real players. And if you hide behind a big plan or backlog, you can avoid the one thing that actually makes a game great: testing the player experience early and often. I've spent the last 6 years working with teams around the world on all kinds of games, and in this episode, I'll show you a simple way to choose what to build next, whether you're indie or AAA, by locking onto the experience you want, the loop that matters right now, and the change that proves or improves it. Game dev is finite time and resources and an infinite number of things you could build. There's this sneaky belief that creeps in often in game development, which is if we don't build all the cool things we thought about, then our game won't be good. But the reality is that in almost every major game you've seen out there, something got cut. Usually many things, sometimes most of the game. Everybody wishes they could have done more. Prioritization is key, and the method you use to prioritize what you're going to do will determine whether you learn fast enough to make a great game or build a lot of things and hope it all comes together in the end. I'm going to tell two stories that I've run into recently. So one was an indie dev, and I was chatting with them. They've got a good prototype. The game feels good. There's some momentum behind it. And now they're getting to this point where like a lot of the basic things are in. And he asked the question, how do I prioritize what I add next? What's the next thing I should build? My initial answer was, you have to start with the player experience. What is it you're trying to make the player feel, do, repeat, the thing that makes your game engaging? If you can't name that experience, you can't prioritize. And I see this a lot where people don't have a clear view of what they're actually trying to create as an experience, and then they can't prioritize. They just make their best guesses. It's a bunch of opinion, basically, of what we should do next. Cause a lot of disagreements, and maybe just one person calls all the shots, but there's no driving North Star for that team. Second team I encountered. This was one. They had a giant game design document. Like there was a creative director basically who knew what all the game was and how all the features were going to fit together. They had the whole picture, and everybody else's job was to build it all a little piece at a time, and eventually it would all come together. So that giant document, whether you call it GDD or whatever it is, big backlog, just systems, features, systems, content, systems, blah, blah, blah. And again, that belief. Once we finish all this stuff, the game will click together and we'll win. Now, this is really convenient for teams a lot of the time because instead of having to actually validate that what they've built is working and creating the experience they want, they can always say something like, well, we can't tell if it's working. It's not complete yet. We won't know until all the features are in, until all the systems are there, until it all clicks together. And I'm not saying there's not a little bit of truth to this, but not nearly as much as people think. And whenever I hear that as an excuse, it just kicks off red flags for me. The reality that I've seen is that when people say that a lot, when it all comes together, that's when it'll work. We have to build all the individual systems first and then put it together in one giant magical moment, and then we'll have this amazing experience. What that allows people to do is avoid reality for months and sometimes years as they keep working on all of these systems over and over and over because someone's convinced them that once we build them all individually, they will just come together. And really, that is not how game development works. I think this is a great way to make a game that never ships or a game that's at best average because you're building towards a future fun that you haven't proven, that you don't have any validation for, that you haven't tested or even tried to understand. You're just hoping that it all clicks together in the end. And I can tell you this, many games, in fact, most games don't. And you have to figure it out as you go. So what's the mistake? A lot of people treat game dev like it's this giant plan-based task work thing. We're going to plan everything out and then we're going to execute against that plan. So plan out all the features we need, all the content, all the assets in that second story of this team. And they knew all the things that they had to put together. And their job was just to build them all individually and hopefully it would all come together. The outcome of that story I just told about the giant list of features and systems and content and how it would all come together and make the magical game, they never finished. Some people left. They ended up shifting and almost actually building something pretty cool when they started moving to a completely different model. But until that point, it had just been a lot of work, a lot of effort, and nothing to show for it. So we see this plan it all out, then execute version. And this misunderstands what kind of work game dev is. Game dev is not work where we do get that luxury of knowing exactly what we need to build and then just getting to make our Gantt chart, order everything out, and then have just the right people with just the right skills go through and build all that stuff. You don't know the outcome up front. If you do that, you might build something. You almost certainly will build something, but it's unlikely to come together and be the fun experience you were trying to create. Features one or a bunch of them often won't create the impact you think they will. And if they're locked into a plan and you're following that plan, when the feature fails or when the combination of features fail, you won't be able to adjust because you'll be too locked in. As you're going forward, the plan should be updated and re-envisioned so that as we learn things, we continue to move towards our best known guess at what might be a good game. So just remember this, game dev is knowledge work. We need to figure it out as we go. We need to learn about it. We need to discover and then explore and then get to an endpoint. We do not start. It's not just a giant list of tasks. It's not a to-do list. That won't get you where you want to go. So let's say you're in one of those two situations I just described. Either you've got the big giant list of everything and you're working through it and you're worried it's not actually coming together, which is a story I hear all the time. Or perhaps you're that indie dev and you've got a game and it's promising, but now where do I go from here? All right, there's two things that I want you to think about as you look at what you should prioritize as the next most valuable thing to do. So one, the first thing I think teams should be prioritizing, especially early on, is learning. How do I figure out what my game might be? Basically, you need to reduce the uncertainty. You've made assumptions, you've made guesses, you've dived into the unknown without knowing what's there definitionally, and it's time to go in and make little tests and spikes and try out little prototypes of things, little experiments that you can do that'll help you answer, okay, wait, does this system work? Will this have the intended emotional impact we're trying to create? Like whatever it is, you need to start learning about that. And so you need to attack your assumptions, you need to attack your risks, and you need to prioritize the work that actually does that. And that might not be directly value-adding work. That might not be finished, polished assets or final-looking features. It may be a bunch of hacked-together nonsense from a final game sense, but it will allow you to learn the things you need to learn to understand what might be fun. So learning is one of the key things you prioritize about. And the way I think about the learning curve is when you start working on a game, you have you don't know very much. You know a little bit. You know, you've played some other games and you think you understand why your game is going to be good, but a lot of that's unvalidated. So you start doing a massive amount of work to try to learn. And then as you learn a lot of information, you're going to slowly start experiencing diminishing returns, right? Basically, it's a logarithmic curve. You're going to learn less and less and less because there's less to learn. You're going to be validating or invalidating if your game is any good. And as you test and understand and the learning starts decreasing, it's time to start actually targeting the next type of value. So the first thing you prioritize against is learning. The second, I'm just going to call value. And value in the context of game development is an improved player experience. It's engagement, it's emotion, mastery, tension, delight, whatever it is, whatever your vision is. If you're trying to make them laugh, if you're trying to make them scared, whatever you are trying to have the player experience, the things that help you get there, that's the value side. And you want to prioritize against that value. Like I said, you often start with learning because you don't know what's valuable when you first kick off. You have too many assumptions, too many unvalidated ideas, too many things to test and unknowns and risks. So you start with learning, and as you learn more and you start hitting diminishing returns on learning, you'll start being able to actually deliver the value. And the value, if learning is like a logarithmic curve, then the value is like an S curve. It starts, if you just tried to focus entirely on that value side, you wouldn't get very far because you don't actually know what's valuable. But if you also focus on learning early on, then you end up with this S curve where you'll not be able to produce much value for a bit because you're doing a ton of learning. And then suddenly you'll be producing a lot of value, and then it'll also start tapering off. There'll be diminishing returns curve there. And somewhere along that line is when you actually say, okay, our game is good enough, we can ship it. And if you can't find that point, then it might mean that like, hey, we don't know, maybe this game won't work or something like that. But the key thing here is when you think about what that value is, don't confuse it with the content, the assets, the features, the systems that make up a game. It is the outcomes you're trying to have for the player. It's the more compelling experience. It's not more systems. So value is the other thing you prioritize against. And you're thinking about that. You should be thinking about that all the time because it's what you're learning about early on. And then it's what you're delivering so that the player gets an amazing experience. I also want to call out, this isn't some sort of thing where we're working along and we're focusing a ton on learning and then like a switch flips, Tuesday we're learning and Wednesday it's time to deliver. I've seen people attempt this as well. We're like, oh, we'll just spend a bunch of time, like concept and pre-production should just be all about learning. And then we throw the switch and in production, we're done learning and we just execute. That's a mistake as well. You should see it as a gradient. You should see it as at the beginning, we do a lot of learning and there's a little bit of delivery we're trying to throw on the top of that of value, some things that we're more sure of and that we have a better idea of. And then as we go, we get more and more and more value that we have confidence in and can deliver, and we have less and less and less learning we have to do to have confidence in the value we're going to deliver to create that compelling experience. If you remember only one thing from this, it's that everything anybody is doing should either be buying you learning or it should be buying you value via compelling experience. Sometimes you get both. Ideally, you get both, but that won't always happen. Sometimes you're just going to be learning by itself, and sometimes you're going to be delivering value and not learning a ton from it. And that's okay. Both of those are okay. Sometimes, again, you'll be able to like, hey, we're going to build this, and it might actually be the final system, but we can build it quickly, and it'll also provide us the learning we need to understand how far we should go along this system in order to have this experience for the player, whatever it might be. Does this sound familiar? You're in a leadership role at a game studio. Everyone is busy working. No one has any time. But the actual game itself, isn't in a good spot. Maybe it's the tech. Maybe it's the lack of a validated prototype. Maybe it's that every person seems to have a different idea about what we're trying to build. But you've got a job. There are reports to send, meetings to schedule and facilitate, the occasional season of performance reviews to go through. And everyone is always so busy. When you step back, it makes you wonder if everyone is just going to keep slowly walking towards the abyss until the project or game fails. Is this what it means to be a leader in games? In tech? To endlessly repeat the same sequence of meetings without really moving the needle? To spend hours trying to get Jira tickets and dashboards where they should be? To pretend that everything is fine when you know deep down it really isn't? It doesn't have to be this way. You can make a difference. You can help your team and game succeed, but sometimes you need a bit of help to get there. I've started a game dev leadership accelerator. It aims to level up leaders who see opportunities to make a difference but don't know how to capitalize on them. We'll walk through what it means to lead well and give you tools to understand your organization's challenges and implement changes to overcome them. Game dev is hard. Knowing how to lead will give you an edge. It will still be hard, but you'll be ready to tackle it. If you're interested, let me know below, hit the link. I hope to see you in the accelerator because I believe better leaders will help teams make better games, and I look forward to someday playing what you create. Okay, so how do you actually apply this? Well, first, I talked about this earlier. If you don't know where you're trying to go, you can't prioritize anything. If you're not sure what the objective is, then how would you prioritize against it? It would be like getting into a car and you don't know where the car is supposed to be going. And so you'd be like, well, what do I prioritize? Do I turn left? Do I turn right? Do I go straight? I don't know. I don't know where I'm going. And so we have to know where we're going in order to make good decisions to get there. So first thing we need to do is actually name that intended experience. If our end intention is to deliver a compelling and engaging experience for a player in some format for some amount of time, something that players will ideally be like happy to play and will pay for or be willing to pay for to have that experience, whatever it is, right? What experience are you trying to create? That's step one. You might call this a game vision. I often call this a game vision, but some way to understand what your North Star is for the game, that'll be the first thing you need to do. If you don't have that, almost nothing else matters. This is the number one reason games fail, according to Graham McAllister. I agree with him. That matches my experience. They do not have a clean game vision. So step A, figure that out, right? First thing you do, figure out how to name what is the intended experience for the player so that you can now prioritize against it. Step B, you identify the loops that most matter now. Games are a series of loops that players go through. No matter what the game is, there's always some number of loops. And it's easy to always go like, well, the core gameplay loop is the most important. That's not always the case, though. Sometimes it's not that's the most important. Sometimes there's a broader loop that's the most important. But they're all series of loops. Like if I'm going through a roguelike, I encounter some enemies and I fight them. That's a little gameplay loop. And then I have a level in which I encounter a sequence of them. And that's another bigger loop. And then there's another one in which like I'm working my way towards a boss. And that's another loop. And then there's like one run through the roguelike. That's another loop, right? All of these are different loops. Now, I could stop there. That's the game, perhaps, but also usually outside of that, I have my meta progression loops. Maybe I'm gaining experience, or maybe my items are leveling up, or maybe I'm unlocking new levels or characters to play. Whatever it is, I've got these series of loops, and all of these loops are the things that players are going through. No matter what game you're making, I can almost guarantee it follows this pattern. Little loops with bigger loops over them and around them and around them and around them until we get out to meta progression. And all of those loops are the things you want to think about. So when you're going, okay, this is my intended experience, the next step is to go, well, which game loop matters the most right now? Is it the core loop? Is it the core meta progression loop? Is it some larger loop? And I do not want to prescribe an answer here. It will depend on your game. And it'll also depend on whether you're trying to learn or whether you're trying to deliver value, because sometimes you need to learn about a loop that's going to be very important later because you have a lot of confidence in your core loop. Like, oh, we don't need to learn that much about the core loop. It's kind of there. We've tested it. It's good enough for now. But man, we need to make sure this loop works, because if that one doesn't work, if this big meta progression loop doesn't work, no one's going to want to play our game for very long. And that's going to be a big problem based on our audience or what we're trying to do, how we plan to make money, whatever it is. So you need to figure out what the intended experience is and then what loop makes the most sense to help you get there. Do not prioritize everything equally. Not all loops are equal. Some matter more than others. That's okay, especially when you think about that over time. Very early on, perhaps your core loop and a single meta progression loop are all that matter, but you learn about those and you start figuring those out, and now you realize we need to put the other loops in. We need to add more levels, or we need to add another type of meta progression or experience system or whatever it might be. All of these different loops might be important at a different point in development. It's your job to understand which ones in order to create the intended experience you're trying to create that best experience. So in any given moment, you're asking what loop is the main engine right now of the experience we're trying to sell that's failing, that's lacking, that we need to learn about, that will help us move the furthest forward. Okay, step A, you need to name the intended experience. Step B, you need to identify the loop that matters right now. Step 3, you need to prioritize the work that improves or validates that loop. So what is the single change that most improves a particular loop for the player? Now, if you've got a giant team, you might have different people working on different loops simultaneously. If you're an indie team, you might all be working on one at a time and going through and going like, okay. Or maybe you've got like two and it's like, hey, we've got, like I said, a core loop and one meta progression loop, or we've got a core loop and one broader loop that's still inside of the game loop. And so like, that's all fine. You need to figure out which ones and what work is going to move that loop forward until you can say that this is doing what we intend for it to do inside of the context of the game. And like, as I said earlier, there's some truth in the idea of, hey, until all the loops are there, it might be hard to understand if the game is really good. But imagine this world where like you have 4 loops and they all suck, and someone's telling you, well, if once we get this 5th loop in, they'll all click together. Maybe there's an outside chance. If I were in that situation, the thing I would do is prioritize the hackiest version of that 5th loop I can figure out to see if that might be true. I wouldn't be just waiting for us to completely do all 5 of those loops. And I would still be looking at my other 4 and going, these shouldn't suck, right? Most likely. So, yes, first thing you do, game vision. Second thing, find the loop that matters the most right now. Third thing, prioritize the work that improves or validates that loop, whether you're learning or whether you're actually building it, maybe both. And then another thing you can look at is whenever you're prioritizing, you also want to be somewhat aware of cost. I don't want you to overthink this, because I think it's easy for people to go into giant complex costing and effort exercises and trying to size everything and understand it. And a lot of times you're moving, you don't have a ton of data. Your estimates aren't going to be very reliable if you were to try to estimate that work. It doesn't mean you shouldn't try. It just means you shouldn't put a lot of time and effort into it, and you shouldn't put too much weight on whatever you get back. It's low fidelity information. It's probably not as accurate as you would like. However, sometimes you might know, oh shoot, to build this part of the player experience is going to take a long time. And so sometimes that might mean we should do it right now because that's our biggest risk. Other times we might go, so we're going to save that for later because that's more of a sure bet. And let's instead right now work on some of these high risk things that we can do faster to see if they play out the way we want. Meanwhile, maybe we'll build a lightweight version. You hear me talk about this a lot. Build a lightweight version of the complex thing to just test and see, is this creating the player experience we want? Okay, so you want to look at that. Because if you've got something that's really cheap you can do that's going to be high impact to what you're trying to create from a player experience, it's something wise to do now, even if it doesn't seem as core sometimes to the experience, just to understand like, okay, cool, we did this cheap thing and it actually did work. It did make this experience much better. You might discover that your thesis around why the game works or doesn't work might shift as you learn those things. So cheap things that have a high potential for learning can have a high impact on the direction that you might take the game, that those things are worthwhile doing early on. Now, I'm going to call this out. I actually want to do a podcast on this at some point with someone else. A lot of people, when they hear me talk about this, they'll go, but wait a minute, what about like the foundations of your game? I will talk at some point around like, how do you set up a system in which you can do healthy iterations. It's not just, hey, everything is a hack together prototype because we just need to learn. And once we finish learning, we need to deliver value as rapidly as possible. That'll get you into trouble. Depending on whether you're in a red ocean or a blue ocean type of game, you might have a different expectation of what your core feature set is, and also a core technical understanding of your code and the way people interact with it that allows you to move rapidly. But I'm going to push that to a different episode. Just know that is a complex question that could lead to a team not diving directly into learning about the game or delivering value against what the game experience is, because they actually have a different product, which is the foundations of the game that they need to get right first. It's almost like I got to get that right before I can build a game. That's all I'm going to say there. I don't want to go too far into that. That'll be a different episode, hopefully at some point. So just keep that in mind. I'm not telling you, hey, just hack together a bunch of stuff as fast as you can, chop everything down to the bare minimum and hope it all sticks. That might get you into more trouble, especially if you're entering red ocean. Okay, so what's one thing you can do with this information? I would like you to take a look at, in whatever system it exists, what you think the next 5 priorities are. If they don't exist, come up with them. These would be the next 5 things I think we should do to make the player experience better, or the next 5 parts of the player experience we could even focus on. You could keep it at that high level. You could go into the more tactical level, depending on where you are in the organization. Either could work. And then I want you to label those. I want you to look at those 5 things. I want you to label them. Hey, is this something that's going to increase our learning about what the player experience or a core loop or whatever it is that we're trying to create? It's going to help us move towards our North Star. Or is this something that's going to improve the player experience right now? So if it's learning, label it with an L. If it's going to improve the player experience, label it with a V for value. If it's neither, label it with an N. And by the way, I would almost like rate these. I get that in all things you do, you're likely to learn a little bit and maybe deliver a little bit of value. I want you to be looking for things that deliver a lot of learning and or a lot of value. So if it doesn't deliver a lot of learning or a lot of value, then give it an N. Like, hey, this thing does neither. It does not provide a ton of learning. It does not provide a ton of value to the player experience. We should be asking, why are we doing it then? Why is this something that's being prioritized? There may be good answers to that question. I would say only on like very large teams, perhaps. Part of me goes like, you should probably just not do that stuff. But that's what I want you to do. Take the next 5 things you think are most important for you and run them through that filter. You can even give them like a score, like this is a learning 7, 1 to 10 or something. And this is a value 2. Okay, cool. Like now compare that to everything else. Think about where you are in development. Earlier on in development, you're going to want to do like I said, a lot more learning. You're going to want to be biased there. You'll get value too, but like the value will be a bit of a secondary thing. And then later on, once you've learned a lot more, you're going to be focusing more on value. So think about where you are in the development cycle as well, where you are along that gradient of like we need to learn less and less and less, because we've figured more out about what our game is, and the amount of delivery of value we are able to do is now higher and higher. So label those 5 things, give them an L, give them a V, give them both if they're both, or give them an N if they have neither. So once everything is labeled, either L, V, both, or N, here are the rules and how you want to approach this. If something is an N, you want to cut it. You want to get rid of it. If you can't, you want to shrink it. Actually, better than shrinking it is pushing it down the backlog. You do not want to get into a situation where you have a bunch of work and stuff gets cut that was really important while you were doing less important stuff that made it into the build. Happens all the time because we don't do this kind of exercise. We don't think about this. We don't prioritize against the learning and the value well, especially later on in value delivery. And so we do stuff because it's part of the plan. We do stuff because someone said that's the next thing. We order the work and we're just going through it in order. And as a result, the most valuable thing we could have done gets left on the cutting room floor, while less valuable things make it into the build, and the player experience suffers, the player suffers, the game suffers. So if it's an N, if you see something that's labeled an N, cut it, push it down the backlog. If you can't do either of those for some reason, try to shrink it, try to put as little time as possible into it, because you want to get on to the things that are labeled with a V or an L. There's also a fail case where everything ends up labeled with a V and there's no L's in your backlog, and you still actually need to be learning. And you see this a lot actually, where people rush to get to the point where they're trying to deliver because they believe that they've hit all the things that were important. They believe that they've solved the problems they needed to solve, and they haven't yet. There's still learning to be done. There's still unknowns. There's still risks and assumptions that they've made that haven't been validated and understood, and so they're trying to just build their way out of it. And so the things that they're building, they say are valuable, but the problem is none of them are working the way they intended. So they keep building different features or systems or assets or kind of whatever it is. They start building stuff in the context of the game, and it's not working. The game just keeps kind of going sideways. It's not fun. It's not coming together well. What this means is maybe everybody would go through and say, yeah, that's a bunch of, like, we would label these things all V in our prioritization schema that we just described. You need some L's in there. It sounds terrible. You need to learn. You need to be learning. If you're not learning, you're going to end up with a big L on the game. So be careful of that. Be careful of swinging the switch too fast and going into a place where we're like, yep, we've learned enough. Let's go ahead and just deliver. Let's execute against the experience. If you end up there, what will end up happening is you build stuff, it won't work. And that should be an indicator to you. We need to go back and learn more. We don't know enough about why this game will or will not succeed. We don't know enough about this player. We don't know enough about how this experience would work. Let's go back and start learning. If you have all these, that's what's going to happen. Now, if you have all L's, if you have all the learning, everything's about learning. You might be like, that's great. Isn't that what we're supposed to be doing? We're exploring and we're figuring it out. And look how much we'll know. Yes, but you can also get caught there. And sometimes teams that are really, really good at the creative side, the exploration side, the concepting and the figuring out, and they're like, ooh, let's try this and that and the other, they'll get caught there for way too long. They've learned enough to say that, look, this assumption, while never perfectly proven, is proven well enough for us to proceed. You get caught endlessly exploring, and you just keep learning until you run out of money. And what you need to be doing is going, okay, we've learned enough. Let's start actually trying to deliver some value. Because at some point, like I said, that gradient should be shifting. We should say, like, okay, the amount of learning we need to do should be reducing over time, and the amount of value we can deliver, that engaging experience we're trying to create, that should be going up. If you're in a land where you're doing nothing but learning for a long period of time, you may be avoiding commitment. You may be avoiding actually having the leaders, the decision makers around your product make a call. And so what you need to start doing is shipping small actual value increments, getting away from pure learning stuff into some value stuff to see how that game actually starts playing out, to see if you have learned enough for this to be a compelling experience. So that's just a quick summary of like an action you could take. Again, label everything L, V, N. Watch out for the risk factors in each. If you have a lot of N's, you should stop doing them. Push them down the backlog. If you have too many V's and everything's a V, but it's not working out, probably means you need to go back and do some more learning to understand what would make your value valuable. And if you have nothing but learning, and that's been going on for a really long time, why aren't you committing and moving forward with something? You might run yourself out of resources while you just explore and everybody gets really masterful at understanding, but you never actually build the game. Second thing, just going to do this real quick for you. Do you have an iteration loop that allows you to learn inside your system? If I were to actually start working on those things, would I rapidly be able to learn from whatever I do or deliver value against the experience that I can then put in front of players and see from what I do? And teams that can't do this usually don't have a tight enough iteration loop. And I don't just mean that in like our cycle should be 3 weeks or 2 weeks or 5 days or whatever. I mean, often it's a technical problem. Often we're not able to push builds rapidly enough to have the team trying something, looking at what the impact was, and then pivoting and learning from that. That's what you want to be doing over and over and over and over again. And so you need to build those into your work system. That needs to be a technical build. That needs to be an actual, like the practice of the team. And you have to have both of those going together, that we understand that what we're doing all the time is some combination of learning and value, and that it should be showing up live into the build. If it's not regularly, it's really, really hard for us to understand if we're succeeding on delivering the outcome, which is that amazing, engaging experience that players love. That's what we're going for here. Okay. I don't want you to be just another average team out there building indie games, building AAA games, building whatever. Average teams, they tend to build a lot of features. They tend to hope it all comes together. They get average or below average results. The best teams are really good at prioritizing learning and player value, creating that engaging experience. Great teams prioritize. They don't just build through the list. They don't have the order. They don't just do a bunch of work and hope. They prioritize the learning and the player value. So the game gets better, or they learn what will make the game better, continuously. And then they keep doing that over and over and over. Prioritization is a much needed skill in game development. It will help us all ship better games. It'll help your team ship better games. I hope you take advantage of it. Hope this has been helpful, and thanks for listening. Hey, if you got something out of this episode, please hit subscribe. It helps the channel a ton. Thanks so much.